The station was enormous. Convergence Prime hung in deep space like an artificial world forged from steel and light, its endless docking rings glowing against the darkness. Thousands of ships moved around it in carefully organized traffic lanes. Merchant vessels, military escorts, diplomatic cruisers, luxury transports from civilizations spread across half the galaxy. Tonight, every major power had gathered there. The Galactic Council was convening for an emergency summit, and every species that mattered had arrived with displays of power meant to impress everyone else. Massive Valkyrie battleships drifted proudly near the central spires, their silver hulls polished so perfectly they reflected entire constellations across their surfaces. Elegant Ascendi diplomatic cruisers moved silently through the void like works of art. Even the brutal Zenthari warships carried an intimidating beauty, all sharp edges and black armor. And then there was a human ship. The HMS Resolute crawled toward the station like a wounded animal refusing to die. Its hull was covered in mismatched armor plates. Entire sections had obviously been repaired dozens of times. One side carried fresh steel darker than the rest of the ship, while another still bore burned scars from battles fought years earlier. External pipes ran visibly along the surface where cleaner races hid everything beneath elegant plating. Nothing about the ship looked modern. Nothing about it looked impressive. Captain Elena Reyes stood silently on the bridge, staring through the main observation window as dozens of alien vessels passed around them. Behind her, the crew worked quietly at their stations. No one spoke. They already knew what was coming. Docking control has assigned us Bay 17, Commander Malik said from the tactical console, the far outer ring. Elena gave a small nod. Of course they had. The outer ring was where outdated cargo haulers and damaged civilian transports usually docked. A faint crackle came through the communication system. Then laughter. Open-channel transmissions flooded the bridge. The automatic translators activated immediately. By the stars, that thing actually made it through hyperspace? That is a warship? I thought humans were sending a museum exhibit. More laughter followed. A Valkyrie voice joined in. Careful. If someone fires a weapon nearby, the human ship may fall apart on its own. Several crew members stiffened at their stations. Ensign Carter muttered something under his breath. Another officer clenched his jaw hard enough to show muscle through his cheek. But nobody answered. Elena kept her eyes forward. Mute external channels, she said calmly. The bridge fell quiet again. Commander Malik glanced toward her carefully. Permission to respond, Captain? No, but I heard them. Her voice remained perfectly controlled. That means they want a reaction. We will not give them one. Malik slowly nodded. The Resolute continued its slow approach toward the station, while hundreds of alien ships watched from nearby traffic lanes. Some openly scanned the vessel. Others recorded it. A few simply drifted closer for a better look at the embarrassing human relic. Elena noticed all of it. She simply stopped caring years ago. The ship was old. Very old. 43 years in active service. 3 wars. 2 near destructions. 7 major refits. The Resolute had survived disasters that should have killed it long ago. That mattered more than appearance. The docking clamps finally locked onto the hull with a heavy metallic impact. The entire ship vibrated softly. Docking complete, Malik reported. Elena stood from the command chair and adjusted her uniform. Simple navy blue. No decorative medals. No polished ceremonial armor like the Valkyrie officers wore. Just practical fabric designed for work. Commander, you have the bridge. Aye, Captain. She turned toward the exit hatch. 2 security officers immediately fell in behind her. As the airlock doors opened, bright white light flooded into the corridor. Convergence Prime was exactly what humanity expected. Perfectly clean, perfectly polished, perfectly artificial. Alien diplomats filled the massive corridors beyond the docking ring. Some species walked on 4 legs. Others floated inside hovering containment fields. Towering armored warriors stood beside fragile-looking intellectual castes wrapped in glowing robes. Nearly all of them stopped to stare at the humans. Elena ignored every single one. The council chamber sat at the heart of the station. It was enormous. Hundreds of seats rose upward in massive circular tiers, surrounding the central floor where the ruling council presided. Representatives from across the galaxy filled the chamber with a constant low murmur of conversation. Humanity's section contained only 3 seats. Near the back, far from the central platform, far from the powerful races, Elena sat down silently as conversations continued around her. Then the great chamber darkened. A beam of white light illuminated the central platform. One figure stepped forward. Admiral Varkos, Supreme Commander of the Valkyrie Imperial Fleet, tall even for his species, wrapped in silver military armor lined with black command markings. He radiated the effortless confidence of someone accustomed to absolute superiority. The chamber immediately fell silent. Varkos looked across the gathered delegates before speaking. The Valkyrie Empire wishes to address the issue of the human frontier colonies. Elena felt tension spread to the chamber instantly. Several delegates exchanged nervous looks. Everyone knew what this meeting was truly about. Varkos continued. 3 systems currently occupied by humanity belong legally to the Valkyrie Empire. Our explorers identified those sectors nearly 2 centuries ago. Elena stood immediately. They were uninhabited, she said firmly. Your government never settled them. Ownership was already established. By abandoned probes. A ripple of whispers spread through the chamber. Varkos slowly turned toward her. For the first time, his black eyes focused directly on the human captain. Then he smiled. Not kindly. Captain Reyes, he said smoothly. I noticed your vessel entering the station earlier. A few Valkyrie delegates chuckled quietly. The Resolute, yes? Elena said nothing. Varkos clasped his hands behind his back. I must confess, I admire humanity's courage. More laughter spread through the chamber. To arrive at an emergency military summit aboard a ship that appears held together by scrap metal and optimism. Even louder laughter now. Some delegates openly mocked the human section. Others avoided looking at them entirely. Elena remained perfectly still. Inside, anger burned like fire, but her expression never changed. The Resolute has defended human colonies for over 4 decades, she replied calmly. It has never failed its mission. Varkos smiled wider. I'm certain your crew believes that. The chamber lights reflected across his polished armor. But tell me honestly, Captain, how long do you believe that relic would survive against a modern Valkyrie warship? The silence that followed felt heavy. Everyone waited for the human response. Elena looked directly into the Admiral's eyes. Then she answered quietly. Long enough. The laughter stopped. Just for a moment. Something about the way she said it felt wrong. Dangerous. Varkos studied her carefully now. Not amused anymore. Then his expression hardened. The Valkyrie Empire formally demands the evacuation of all human colonies within the disputed frontier sector. His voice echoed across the chamber. You have 72 hours to comply. The room exploded into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another. Arguments erupted across entire sections of the chamber. Council members called desperately for order, but Elena barely heard any of it, because deep down, she already knew this would end in war. The HMS Resolute departed Convergence Prime 12 hours later. No escorts, no reinforcements, no promises of rescue. The ancient battleship pulled away from the station, while hundreds of alien vessels watched from a distance. Some ships transmitted mocking farewell messages over open channels. Others simply observed silently now, uncertain after Captain Rey's final response to Admiral Varkos. The crew ignored all of it. Inside the Resolute, the atmosphere had changed completely. Nobody laughed. Nobody relaxed. War was coming. Captain Elena Reyes stood alone on the bridge, staring at the stars stretching endlessly ahead of them as the ship entered faster-than-light travel. The blue hyperspace tunnel shimmered across the main viewport. Beautiful, cold, silent. Commander Malik stepped beside her carrying a data tablet. Earth Command just confirmed updated enemy fleet estimates. Elena took the tablet. Her eyes scanned the report once. Then again. 42 warships, 3 battleships, 9 heavy cruisers, 30 destroyers, all under direct command of Admiral Varkos himself. She handed the tablet back slowly. They're committing that much force for 3 colonies? Malik's expression darkened. It isn't about the colonies anymore. No, it wasn't. This had become about pride, about dominance, about teaching humanity its place. The bridge remained quiet for several moments before another officer spoke carefully. "Captain, there's more." Elena looked over. Lieutenant Sato stood at the communication station, visibly tense. "The nearest Earth fleet group is 21 days away at maximum burn." A silence settled over the bridge. Everyone understood what that meant. They would stand alone. Elena nodded once. Understood. No panic, no hesitation. That calmness spread through the bridge crew almost immediately. It always did. The captain walked toward the center of the bridge and activated the internal communications network. "All hands," she said evenly. "Report to Cargo Bay 1 in 10 minutes." Across the ship, alarms chimed softly. Crew members emerged from maintenance tunnels, engineering compartments, medical stations, and weapons bays. Hundreds of men and women moved through the old corridors toward the largest gathering area aboard the Resolute. Cargo Bay 1 was massive but worn with age. The walls carried old burn marks from fires long repaired. Exposed support beams lined the ceiling. One corner still showed patchwork plating from battle damage sustained years earlier. 800 crew members filled the chamber. Engineers, Marines, technicians, pilots, medics. Veterans with gray hair stood beside recruits barely old enough to shave. Every one of them looked toward the elevated platform at the center of the bay. Captain Reyes stepped forward. For a moment, she simply looked at them. Her crew, her people, the ones who would likely die with her soon. "I won't insult you by pretending the situation is good," she began. The room became perfectly silent. "The Valkyrie Empire has deployed a full strike fleet toward the frontier colonies." Several younger crew members shifted uneasily. Others remained motionless. "We are the only warship standing between that fleet and 50 million civilians." No dramatic music. No patriotic shouting. Just truth, raw and direct. A mechanic near the back slowly crosses arms. One of the Marine officers lowered her eyes briefly. Everyone understood the odds. "We will probably not survive this mission," Elena continued calmly. A few crew members exchanged glances, but nobody looked shocked. They already knew. The nearest reinforcements are weeks away. Earth Command cannot reach us in time. Silence again. Heavy silence. Elena walked slowly across the platform. "I know what the galaxy says about this ship." Some crew members smiled faintly now. The Relic. A few quiet chuckles. The scrapyard battleship. More smiles. The museum piece. Even a few laughs now. Elena nodded once. "I've heard them all." Her expression hardened slightly. "But let me remind you what this ship really is." The room became still again. This vessel fought at Titan Station. Several veterans straightened immediately. It survived the siege of Europa. Now the older crew members were watching her with fierce attention. And during the Arcturus collapse, this ship continued fighting for 11 hours after losing half its reactor systems. That got everyone's attention. Even the youngest recruits knew that story. The Resolute should have died there. Instead, it destroyed 4 enemy cruisers while burning from the inside out. Elena looked around the bay carefully. This ship survives because humans built it. Now there was pride in her voice. Not arrogance. Certainty. "We build ugly ships." A few crew members laughed openly. "We build heavy ships." More laughter. "We build ships held together with replacement parts, emergency welds, and whatever the hell engineering can find at 3 a.m. That got a much bigger reaction. Even Chief Engineer Alvarez smirked near the front row. "But we also build ships that keep fighting after every elegant enemy vessel in the battle has already exploded." The laughter stopped. Now the room felt different. Focused. Intense. Elena pointed downward toward the deck beneath their feet. "The galaxy sees old armor." Her voice lowered slightly. "I see 6 layers of reinforced titanium plating." She pointed toward the walls. "They see outdated systems." A harder tone now. "I see backup systems for our backup systems." Several engineers nodded proudly. "They see a relic." She paused. "I see the toughest damn warship humanity ever built." The cargo bay erupted. Crew members slammed fists against railings and cargo crates. Others shouted approval. The fear was still there, but now something stronger was growing beside it. Defiance. Elena raised one hand, and the room quieted instantly. I will not force anyone to stay aboard. That surprised them. If you wish to transfer off at the next station, you may do so with full honor. Several crew members looked around uncertainly. Nobody moved. Elena waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Not one person stepped forward. A small smile touched her face. That's what I thought. A low ripple of laughter spread through the bay. Commander Malik stepped beside her. Captain, he said quietly. Long-range sensors just updated. Elena took the tablet from him. Her eyes narrowed slightly. The Valkyrie fleet had accelerated. They would arrive at the colony world New Carthage 18 hours earlier than expected. The room fell silent as crew members saw her expression change. Elena looked back at them. Then she spoke 4 simple words. Get the ship ready. And suddenly the entire Resolute came alive. The HMS Resolute transformed over the next 18 hours. The old battleship no longer felt tired. It felt angry. Every corridor echoed with movement as engineers crawled through maintenance shafts. Weapons crews loaded ammunition into ancient rail systems, and technicians rerouted power through networks most modern ships no longer even used. The Resolute was awake, and deep inside the ship, Chief Engineer Sofia Alvarez was preparing it for war. Careful with that conduit, she shouted from beneath an open reactor panel. If you disconnect the wrong line, we lose half the portside thrusters. A young technician froze instantly. Sorry, Chief. Don't apologize. Fix it. The engineering deck was chaos. Steam hissed from exposed pipes overhead. Sparks flashed behind open wall panels. The smell of overheated machinery filled the air while dozens of engineers worked around the clock beneath flickering lights. To outsiders, it would have looked like a disaster. To human engineers, it looked normal. Ensign Tyler Park carefully stepped over a pile of dismantled components while carrying a diagnostic scanner. Fresh from the academy, he still looked overwhelmed by the ship around him. Chief, he said nervously, I don't understand something. Alvarez slid out from beneath the reactor housing, grease covering one side of her face. That makes 2 of us, kid. What is it? Park hesitated. Why does the Resolute have so many manual systems? Several nearby engineers smirked immediately. Alvarez stood slowly. Because computers fail. Park blinked. But modern ships use automated combat systems for everything. Exactly. She grabbed a nearby metal wrench and pointed it toward the ceiling. The Valkyrie build beautiful ships. Elegant ships. Fast ships. Everything automated. Everything optimized. Her expression hardened slightly. But when those systems fail, the whole ship starts dying. She tossed the wrench onto a nearby console. The loud metallic clang echoed through engineering. This old monster keeps fighting even after half the systems are gone. Park looked around engineering again. Now he noticed things differently. The Resolute didn't just have one power network. It had several. Different wiring paths. Different reactor feeds. Backup controls mounted beside older backup controls. Nothing looked efficient. Everything looked redundant. Alvarez noticed his expression and grinned. Now you're getting it. She walked toward the central reactor chamber. The massive fusion core pulsed behind thick armor glass, humming with enough energy to vaporize a city. Then she pointed toward 3 smaller chambers surrounding it. Most species build one reactor. Park stared. The smaller reactors were active too. We have 4. His eyes widened. Why? Because humans are paranoid. Several engineers laughed loudly. Alvarez crossed her arms proudly. 1 reactor gets damaged, 3 keep working. She pointed upward again. 1 engine fails, we reroute power. Another direction. Main targeting system breaks, we use manual tracking. Another. Primary bridge destroyed, we have secondary command centers buried inside the hull. Park slowly shook his head. This ship is basically designed to survive being destroyed. Alvarez smiled. Exactly. Elsewhere aboard the Resolute, Captain Reyes studied tactical projections with Commander Malik inside the ship's war room. Three-dimensional holograms floated above the central table, showing the incoming Valkyrie fleet formation. Even the simulation looked intimidating. 42 enemy warships advanced in perfect tactical organization. Precise, disciplined, efficient. Malik zoomed in on several destroyers. Their standard attack doctrine relies on long-range engagement. Elena nodded. Energy lance weapons. Extremely accurate at distance. He activated another display. Our rail guns only become fully effective at close range. A dangerous silence settled over the room, because both officers already understood what that meant. The Valkyrie would try to stay far away. The Resolute would need to get close. Very close. Malik studied her carefully. You already have a plan. It wasn't a question. Elena remained silent for several moments. Then she finally spoke. We break their formation. Malik frowned slightly. With one ship, we don't fight them like they expect. She pointed toward the hologram. The Valkyrie rely on coordination, precision, clean firing patterns. Her finger moved directly into the center of the enemy formation, so we turned the battle into chaos. Malik's eyes narrowed slowly. Now he understood. If the Resolute got close enough, the Valkyrie ships would lose their greatest advantage. Their own formations would trap them. Their firing lanes would collapse. And in close-range combat, the ugly old human battleship became something terrifying. A blunt weapon. A predator. Malik exhaled slowly. That's an insane plan. Elena gave the faintest hint of a smile. Yes. An alarm suddenly interrupted the room. Both officers looked up instantly. A tactical officer's voice echoed through the ship. Long-range sensors confirm enemy fleet arrival in frontier space. The hologram updated immediately. 42 red markers appeared near the outer edge of the new Carthage system. The Valkyrie had arrived, and they were moving fast. Elena stared at the display for several long seconds. Then she activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands. Every crew member aboard the Resolute froze. The captain's voice echoed across every deck. This is it. No dramatic speech. No attempt to inspire false hope. Just absolute calm. The enemy fleet will enter engagement range within 3 hours. Around the ship, crew members quietly returned to work. Weapons crews locked ammunition feeds into place. Marines secured combat armor. Damage control teams prepared emergency sealant foam beside hull breach stations. Nobody panicked. Nobody ran. The Resolute had become eerily calm, like a veteran fighter moments before the bell rang. Captain Reyes looked once more at the tactical display. 42 enemy warships against one aging human battleship. Impossible odds. Then again, humanity had survived impossible odds before. New Carthage floated below them like a jewel in the darkness. Blue oceans, golden continents, millions of city lights glowing against the night side of the planet. 50 million civilians lived down there. Families, children, entire generations who believed the human fleet would protect them. Captain Elena Reyes stood on the Resolute's bridge, staring at the world beneath them while enemy warships emerged from hyperspace above the system, one after another, like predators entering hunting grounds. The tactical display exploded with red markers. 42 enemy ships, 3 battleships, heavy cruisers, destroyer wings, all moving in flawless formation. Commander Malik exhaled quietly. They came in tight. Elena nodded once. They want intimidation before battle. The Valkyrie fleet spread slowly across the stars ahead, silver hulls gleaming beneath distant sunlight. Even from extreme range, the enemy formation looked overwhelming. Beautiful, perfect, deadly. The Resolute drifted alone between the fleet and the planet, a single battered ship standing against an armada. An incoming transmission alert flashed across the bridge. Malik looked toward Elena carefully. Admiral Varkos. Put him through. The central screen illuminated instantly. Varkos appeared seated inside the command chamber of his flagship, the Imperial Dominion. Everything behind him gleamed with polished precision. Officers stood at perfect attention beside pristine holographic displays. Not a single burn mark. Not a single exposed wire. The exact opposite of the Resolute. Captain Reyes, Varco said calmly. I admit, I did not expect you to actually stand and fight. Elena sat silently in her command chair. We're still here. His dark eyes studied her carefully. Yes, he replied softly. For the moment, the Valkyrie admiral stood slowly. Behind him, dozens of officers watched the transmission with open confidence. You have courage, Captain, but courage does not change mathematics. He activated a tactical display beside him. 42 red fleet markers surrounded one small blue icon. The Resolute. You cannot win this. No, Elena replied evenly. But neither can you. A faint smile crossed Varco's face. You still believe your ship matters. Elena leaned slightly forward. You still believe appearances matter. For the first time, the Admiral's smile weakened. The bridge remained silent for several long seconds. Then Varco spoke again. I will offer you one final chance. His tone became colder. Surrender the colony peacefully, and your crew will survive. Elena's answer came instantly. No. The Admiral sighed slowly. A pity. Then his expression hardened completely. Destroy them. The transmission ended. Almost immediately, 3 Valkyrie destroyers broke formation and accelerated toward the Resolute. Fast. Very fast. The bridge lights dimmed automatically as tactical systems shifted fully into combat mode. Throughout the ship, alarms began sounding. Not panicked alarms. Controlled ones. Measured. Steady. The crew moved instantly. Weapons crews locked into firing stations. Engineering rerouted combat power. Hull SEAL teams took position beside emergency compartments. Every person aboard the Resolute already knew their job. Commander Malik studied incoming vectors. Enemy destroyers approaching attack range. Speed. Extremely aggressive. Elena smiled faintly. Good. That meant they were overconfident. The destroyers closed rapidly. Elegant silver ships slicing through space with impossible grace. Their weapon systems glowed blue as energy built along massive forward cannons. Enemy charging energy lances. Malik warned. Hold position. Several bridge officers exchanged uncertain glances. The Resolute remained completely still. No weapons charging. No evasive maneuvers. Nothing. To the Valkyrie, it looked helpless. A sitting target. The destroyers entered firing range. 40,000 kilometers, Malik reported. Still the Resolute did not move. 30,000. The enemy ship spread outward slightly, surrounding the human vessel. Textbook execution. Clean firing lanes. Perfect attack geometry. Exactly what the Valkyrie Academy would teach. 25,000. The enemy weapons reached full charge. Blue light glowed across the darkness ahead. Somewhere on the lower decks, Ensign Park whispered nervously, "Why aren't we firing?" Chief Alvarez didn't even look up from her reactor console. Because the captain's waiting. For what? A dangerous grin spread across her face. For them to make the mistake. On the bridge, enemy firing. 3 massive energy lances erupted across space. Blinding blue beams tore directly toward the Resolute with enough power to vaporize entire sections of the hull. And then, the human ship vanished. The beams slammed harmlessly through empty space. What? The Valkyrie destroyers broke formation instantly. The Resolute exploded forward out of darkness like a missile. Every hidden engine roared to life simultaneously. The entire ship shuddered violently as for concealed reactor cores dumped power directly into the drive systems. Acceleration warnings screamed across every deck. The old relic suddenly moved with terrifying speed. Commander Malik grinned. Full combat output confirmed. The enemy destroyers hesitated, just for a second, but in battle, 1 second was forever. Close distance. Elena ordered calmly. The Resolute surged directly into the center of the enemy formation, not smoothly like a Valkyrie ship, violently, aggressively. Hidden maneuvering thrusters blasted from dozens of armored vents across the hull, twisting the massive battleship through incoming fire with brutal unpredictability. The destroyers tried to retarget. Too slow. Range! 15,000 kilometers. Now the Valkyrie ships understood the danger. The human vessel wasn't trying to survive. It was charging directly into knife fight range. "Rail guns ready," Malik shouted. Elena stood slowly from her command chair. "Fire." The Resolute unleashed hell. Massive rail cannons thundered across the hull simultaneously, launching dense tungsten slugs at impossible speeds. No glowing energy beams. No elegant plasma weapons. Just raw kinetic destruction. The first destroyer never had time to react. 20 solid rounds slammed into its forward shields in less than 2 seconds. The shield barrier shattered instantly. The next impacts punched directly through the ship. Armor exploded outward. Atmosphere vented violently into space. The destroyer spun sideways, trailing debris and fire. The second enemy ship attempted evasive maneuvers. Too late. The Resolute rolled aggressively beneath incoming fire, while secondary rail batteries tore through the destroyer's engine section. The rear half of the vessel detonated in a chain reaction of explosions. The third destroyer finally landed a direct hit. A massive energy lance slammed into the Resolute's side. The bridge shook violently. Warning sirens screamed. Several lights exploded overhead. Armor melted across Deck 7. But the human ship kept coming. Closer, closer, like it didn't care about damage at all. Elena gripped her command console tightly. "Chief." Alvarez answered instantly through communications. "Already doing it." The Resolute's reactor output surged again. The rail guns overheated immediately. Warning alarms flashed red across the weapon systems. Nobody cared. "Fire everything." The third destroyer disappeared beneath a storm of tungsten impacts. Its shields collapsed. Its hull split apart. Then the reactor core detonated. A white explosion lit the battlefield. Silence fell across the bridge. 30 seconds earlier, the galaxy had watched 3 advanced Valkyrie warships move confidently toward a helpless human relic. Now all 3 were dead. Commander Malik stared at the tactical display, then slowly looked up. "Enemy fleet!" Holding position, Elena looked toward the stars ahead. 42 enemy warships had stopped moving, because for the first time, the Valkyrie Empire was afraid. For several long seconds, nobody in the Valkyrie fleet moved. 42 warships drifted silently across the battlefield, while the burning wreckage of 3 destroyers tumbled through space between them and the Resolute. Shock spread through every enemy command deck. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The human ship was old, primitive, outdated, and yet 3 elite Valkyrie destroyers had just been annihilated in under a minute on the bridge of the Imperial Dominion. Admiral Varco stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His officers looked terrified. 1 destroyer loss would have been embarrassing. 3 was impossible. "How?" one officer whispered. Varco's black eyes narrowed slowly. "No," he said coldly. "This changes nothing." His voice hardened instantly. "All ships advance." The tactical officers hesitated. The admiral slammed one hand against the command rail. "Now!" Across the battlefield, the Valkyrie fleet surged forward together. Cruisers accelerated into attack patterns. Destroyers spread outward for flanking positions. Battleships powered massive energy weapons capable of splitting moons apart. The stars themselves seemed to glow blue from charging firepower. Commander Malik studied the incoming wave. "They're committing everything." Captain Reyes remained perfectly calm. "Good." Several bridge officers looked toward her in surprise. Elena stood slowly. "They're angry now." Her eyes locked onto the tactical display. Angry enemies make mistakes. The first wave opened fire. Space erupted instantly. Dozens of energy lances slashed across the darkness, while missile swarms poured toward the Resolute from every direction. The bridge shook violently as emergency maneuvering thrusters fired. Hard port. The old battleship twisted sideways, just before 2 energy beams crossed through the space where it had been. A third blast struck the lower hull. The entire ship groaned. Warning sirens screamed across every deck. Hull breach. Deck 9. "Seal it." The Resolute rolled again as point defense cannons opened fire automatically, shredding incoming missiles in rapid bursts of kinetic fire. But there were too many. Explosions hammered the hull repeatedly. Lights flickered. Sparks rained from sealing conduits. Still the human ship kept moving directly toward the enemy fleet. On the engineering deck, chaos exploded around Chief Alvarez. A coolant pipe ruptured overhead, spraying steam across the compartment. Engineers shouted over deafening machinery noise, while reactor temperatures climbed dangerously. Reinforce the starboard feed lines. Alvarez yelled, "They're melting!" Ensign Park struggled to drag replacement conduits across the deck, while emergency alarms flashed around him. "Chief, we're losing reactor stability." "Then stabilize it." "That's not how reactors work." Alvarez grabbed a welding torch. "Today it is." Back on the bridge, the Resolute plunged directly into the middle of the Valkyrie formation, and suddenly the enemy's greatest advantage became a nightmare. Their own ships were too close together. Energy lances crisscrossed dangerously between Allied vessels. Missile trajectories overlapped. Targeting systems struggled to track the violently maneuvering human battleship, weaving through the center of the fleet like a wounded predator. Enemy cruisers approaching from both flanks. Malik shouted, "Perfect." Elena pointed toward the nearest cruiser. Full broadside. The Resolute rotated hard. 5 remaining rail guns fired simultaneously. The cruiser's shields flared brilliantly, then collapsed. Solid tungsten rounds punched through the elegant hull with brutal force. The enemy vessel broke apart in a chain of internal detonations. Nearby Valkyrie ships immediately scattered to avoid the debris field, and in doing so, disrupted their own formation further. "Captain," Malik said carefully, "they're losing coordination." Elena nodded once. "That's the point." Another barrage slammed into the Resolute. This one hit hard. The bridge lights died completely for half a second before emergency power restored them in deep red emergency lighting. Smoke filled part of the command deck. Hull integrity falling. Port armor down to 40%. 2 rail batteries offline. Casualty reports flooded the bridge. Medical teams overwhelmed. Fires spreading across multiple decks. And still, the Resolute kept charging forward. One Valkyrie destroyer attempted to swing behind a human ship for a killing shot. Elena saw it instantly. Reverse thrust. Full power. Several officers looked shocked. At the speed? Do it. The Resolute suddenly decelerated violently. The enemy destroyer overshot directly into the firing line of another Valkyrie cruiser. Blue energy beams erupted. The destroyer vanished in a flash of friendly fire. Bridge officers aboard the Resolute stared at the tactical display, then slowly realized what had happened. Commander Malik actually laughed once. "They're shooting each other now." Another enemy cruiser moved too close. Elena didn't hesitate. "Target engines." The rail guns thundered again. The cruiser's rear section exploded instantly, spinning helplessly through space before colliding with a nearby destroyer. Now panic was spreading through the Valkyrie fleet. Their perfect formation was collapsing into chaos. Ships maneuvered desperately to avoid collisions. Targeting systems became unreliable. Communication channels flooded with contradictory orders. And in the middle of all of it, the battered human battleship kept fighting like it refused to die. On the Imperial Dominion, Admiral Varkos watched his fleet unravel in growing horror. "This is impossible," one officer whispered. "No," Varkos said slowly. Now he understood. The humans had planned this. The old battleship wasn't surviving despite the chaos. It was creating the chaos. Another explosion lit the battlefield as yet another destroyer died beneath railgun fire. The Admiral clenched his fists tightly. "Pull back to Formation Delta," he ordered. "But Admiral, that is an order." Across the battlefield, surviving Valkyrie ships attempted to retreat and regroup, but the Resolute chased them, aggressively, violently, like a wounded animal that smelled blood. Captain Reyes stood at the center of her burning bridge, while emergency lights painted her face red. The ship shook beneath constant impacts. Crew members bled from injuries. Half the displays no longer worked, and still her voice remained calm. "Don't let them recover." Commander Malik stared at her carefully, then slowly nodded, because now he understood something terrifying. The Resolute wasn't fighting to survive anymore. It was fighting to break the enemy's will. The battle had stopped making sense to the Valkyrie. That terrified them more than the damage. The Resolute should have been dead already. No ship could survive this much punishment. Its hull was shredded across entire sections. Fires burned openly through exposed compartments. Atmosphere vented from multiple decks into space, while damaged armor peeled away under constant enemy fire. And yet, the human battleship kept attacking. Not retreating, not hiding, attacking. On the bridge of the Imperial Dominion, Admiral Varkos watched the battlefield with growing disbelief. The tactical display looked wrong. Completely wrong. Valkyrie doctrine relied on precision warfare, carefully coordinated attack vectors, layered firing formations, clean tactical positioning. But the Resolute had turned the battle into pure violence. Destroyers crashed into each other while trying to evade railgun fire. Cruisers accidentally blocked Allied firing lanes. Communication traffic collapsed beneath panic and contradictory commands. And everywhere the old human battleship appeared, more ships died. "Admiral," one officer said nervously, "our outer destroyer wings are requesting permission to disengage." Varkos slowly turned toward him. "Permission denied." "But, sir, their formations are collapsing." "Then reform them." His roar silenced the bridge instantly. The Admiral looked back toward the main tactical display. The Resolute had just rammed directly through the center of another destroyer squadron. Not metaphorically. Literally. The human battleship slammed shoulder first into one enemy vessel, crushing armor plating inward before firing rail guns point blank into a second ship less than a kilometer away. The third destroyer attempted escape. Too slow. A storm of tungsten rounds tore through its engines. 3 more ships dead. The Valkyrie crews watching the battle no longer saw an outdated relic. They saw something insane. Meanwhile, aboard the Resolute, emergency lights flickered across smoke-filled corridors while damage control teams fought fires deck by deck. The ship sounded wounded. Metal groaned constantly around them. Some compartments had become little more than twisted wreckage held together by emergency support beams. And deep inside engineering, Chief Alvarez was screaming at a reactor, "Don't you dare die on me." Ensign Park stared at her in disbelief. "Chief, are you threatening the reactor?" It knows what it did. The entire compartment shook violently from another impact. Several engineers were thrown sideways. Warning sirens exploded across the room. Poor containment field destabilizing. Park's eyes widened. "That's bad, right?" Alvarez grabbed a plasma wrench. "That depends how much you enjoy radiation poisoning." Across engineering, exhausted technicians worked like people possessed. Some manually redirected coolant flow through melted conduits. Others physically carried replacement power cells through smoke-filled corridors while explosions rocked the ship around them. Nobody stopped working. Nobody considered surrender. The Resolute was becoming less a warship and more a stubborn act of human refusal. Back on the bridge, Commander Malik wiped blood from the side of his face while reading tactical reports. "We've confirmed 11 enemy kills." Several officers looked stunned. 11, against impossible odds. Elena remained focused on the battlefield ahead. "How many operational railguns?" 3. "Missile reserves?" "Nearly depleted." "Engines?" Malik hesitated. "Technically functioning." That actually earned a faint smile from her. Technically functioning was the most optimistic engineering report the Resolute ever received. Another violent impact shook the bridge. A nearby console exploded. One communications officer collapsed instantly from shrapnel wounds. Medical personnel rushed forward. "Elena," Malik started. "We're still operational." Her voice cut through the chaos like steel. And somehow, that steadied everyone again. The tactical display suddenly shifted. The Imperial Dominion was moving. The enemy flagship had finally entered the battle directly. Massive, silver, heavily armored, protected by layers of screening cruisers and destroyers. Commander Malik stared at the incoming flagship. "That thing alone could destroy us." Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes." Then something dangerous appeared in her expression, "which is why we're going after it." The bridge froze. Malik slowly looked toward her. "You can't be serious." "Very." The tactical officer blinked. "Captain, that's the center of the enemy fleet." "I know. We'll never survive getting there." Elena looked calmly at the battlefield. Burning ships drifted through the darkness. Explosions lit space like artificial stars. The Resolute itself was barely holding together. Then she said quietly, "We were never supposed to survive this battle." Silence. Nobody answered, because she was right. This mission had always been suicide. The difference was, now they had a chance to win. Elena activated ship-wide communications. Her voice echoed across every surviving deck of the Resolute. All hands. Around the ship, exhausted crew members looked up from fires, injuries, and shattered machinery. "We have damaged the enemy fleet." Her tone remained calm, but they still believe they can outlast us. She looked directly at the tactical display of the Imperial Dominion. "So, we're going to teach them something about humanity." In engineering, Alvarez slowly grinned. On the weapons deck, injured railgun crews kept loading ammunition. Marines tightened broken armor straps. Medics continued treating wounded beside sparking equipment. Nobody spoke. They just listened. Elena's voice lowered slightly. "The Valkyrie fight to protect ships." Another explosion rocked the hull. "We fight to protect people." Her eyes hardened. "That is why they fear us now." A silence spread across the Resolute. Not fearful silence. Determined silence. Then Elena gave the order that changed everything. "Set course directly for the enemy flagship." Commander Malik stared at her. "Captain, maximum acceleration." Now, even veteran bridge officers looked shocked. The tactical officer whispered, "That's a ramming course." Elena sat calmly in her chair. "Yes." Far across the battlefield, Valkyrie sensor systems suddenly detected the Resolute changing direction, straight toward the Imperial Dominion. No evasive maneuvers, no retreat vector, just direct acceleration, like a missile, like something that no longer cared about survival. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Varkos watched the new trajectory appear on his display, and for the first time in his military career, he felt fear. "They're not retreating," one officer whispered. Another looked horrified. "They're charging us." Varkos stared silently at the burning human battleship, racing directly toward his flagship through storms of weapons fire. Then he finally understood the truth. Humans weren't dangerous because of technology. Humans were dangerous because they would sacrifice everything to win. And suddenly, the entire Valkyrie fleet realized the same thing at once. The HMS Resolute charged directly into hell. Every remaining Valkyrie warship opened fire simultaneously. Energy lances carved across the darkness in blinding waves, while missile batteries flooded space ahead of the human battleship. Plasma torpedoes detonated around the Resolute like miniature suns. The old ship disappeared inside the storm. On the bridge, every surface shook violently. Warning sirens screamed nonstop now. Several overhead panels collapsed completely, showering sparks and burning debris across the command deck. Hull breach. Deck 5. Life support failing on lower sections. Reactor temperatures critical. Commander Malik gripped the station tightly as another impact nearly threw him sideways. Distance of flagship? 20,000 kilometers. Still too far. The Resolute pushed forward anyway. Armor plates ripped away from the hull under concentrated enemy fire. Entire sections of the ship burned openly now. One engine exploded in a violent burst of flame, and somehow the battleship kept accelerating. In engineering, Chief Alvarez stared at melting reactor controls while emergency coolant flooded across the floor around her boots. "We are way past safety limits." Park shouted over the alarms. Alvarez slammed another power relay into place manually. "Safety limits are for people planning to survive." The reactor screamed louder. Warning lights turned from red to black. Even the emergency systems were starting to fail. Back on the bridge, the Imperial Dominion finally filled the main viewport. Massive, silver, untouched. The flagship dwarfed every other ship on the battlefield. And directly behind it, the planet New Carthage still burned beneath distant sunlight. 50 million civilians depending on one dying ship. Elena Reyes stared at the flagship ahead, then calmly gave the order. All remaining weapons. The tactical officer blinked. "Captain, target the flagship." 3 surviving rail guns rotated forward. Their barrels glowed red-hot, from overuse. Most modern warships would have shut the systems down hours ago. The Resolute didn't care. Fire. The rail guns thundered. Massive tungsten rounds slammed into flagship shields at point-blank range. Blue energy barriers flashed violently across the Imperial Dominion's hull. But this time, the shields held. Barely. Admiral Varkos watched the impacts from his bridge, while officers shouted around him. Shield integrity dropping. Forward batteries overloaded. Human vessels still advancing. The Admiral stared in disbelief. The Resolute looked like a corpse still refusing to fall. Its hull was shattered. Entire sections vented atmosphere. One side of the ship burned continuously, and yet it kept coming, straight toward him. Destroy it! Varkos roared. The Imperial Dominion unleashed everything. Heavy energy cannons fired directly into the Resolute's bow. The human ship shook so violently several bridge officers were thrown from their stations. The forward hull collapsed inward. Decks disappeared instantly beneath molten metal and explosive decompression. Commander Malik looked toward Elena. "Captain, we're losing the ship." Elena's expression never changed. "How long do we have?" He checked the damage reports, then looked back at her slowly. "Maybe 30 seconds. That was enough. She activated internal communications one final time. All hands. Across the dying battleship. Surviving crew members listened quietly while the ship burned around them. "You've done enough." In engineering, Alvarez leaned against a failing reactor console, while blood ran down one side of her face. On the weapons deck, exhausted crews loaded final ammunition rounds with shaking hands. In medical bays, wounded soldiers looked upward through flickering emergency lights. Elena's voice remained perfectly steady. The galaxy wanted humanity to surrender. Another explosion tore through the hull. "We refuse." The Resolute shuddered violently. "They wanted us afraid." Fires spread across the bridge ceiling. "We taught them fear instead." Several crew members smiled despite everything. Elena stood slowly from her command chair. Her body ached. Smoke filled the bridge. The ship around her was dying, but her eyes remained locked on the enemy flagship ahead. Chief Alvarez. The engineer answered instantly through static-filled communications. "Still alive, Captain." "How much power do we have left?" A pause. Then a dangerous laugh came through the speakers. "Enough to do something incredibly stupid." Elena smiled faintly. "Perfect." She looked toward Commander Malik. "All remaining reactor output." Now he understood. His eyes widened. "Captain, if we overload the rail guns, they'll explode. And us with them." Elena looked back toward the stars ahead. "Yes." Silence. Then Malik slowly nodded, because there was nothing else left to say. The Resolute accelerated one final time, straight toward the Imperial Dominion. Inside engineering, Alvarez manually disengaged every reactor safety protocol still functioning. Warning alarms became deafening. Power surged violently through the ship. The remaining rail guns glowed white-hot. Across the battlefield, Valkyrie ships began breaking formation, retreating, not because they had been ordered to, but because they were afraid. The humans were actually going to do it. "They're insane," one Valkyrie officer whispered. "No," Admiral Varko said quietly. Now his voice held something new. "Respect. They're human." The distance collapsed rapidly. 10,000 kilometers. 5,000. 3,000. The Imperial Dominion tried to turn away. Too slow. The Resolute was already inside minimum firing distance. Elena raised one hand calmly. "Fire." The overloaded rail guns unleashed their final barrage. The barrels exploded instantly afterward, but the tungsten storm had already crossed the distance. At point-blank range, the Imperial Dominion shields finally collapsed. Massive impacts tore through the flagship's armor. Explosions erupted across its forward sections. One round punched directly into the bridge tower. Another tore through the primary reactor shielding. The flagship began burning. The entire Valkyrie fleet froze in horror. Their invincible command ship was dying. Then the Resolute's engines finally failed. The old battleship drifted forward through fire and debris, broken almost beyond recognition. Emergency power collapsed across the ship. Lights died. Weapons shut down. Silence spread slowly through the darkness. And for one terrifying moment, nobody moved. Then Commander Malik checked the tactical display. His breathing stopped. Captain, Elena slowly looked toward him. The Valkyrie fleet. He stared at the screen in disbelief. They're retreating. Outside the shattered hull of the Resolute, 42 enemy warships turned away from battle, not because they had been defeated militarily, because their will had broken first. The battlefield drifted in silence. Burning debris floated between shattered warships, while emergency rescue beacons blinked weakly across the darkness. Pieces of destroyed cruisers spun endlessly beside frozen clouds of atmosphere and molten metal. At the center of it all, the HMS Resolute still lived. Barely. Emergency lights glowed dim red across the ruined bridge, while exhausted crew members sat wherever they could, too drained to speak. Smoke lingered in the air. Half the consoles were dead. Entire sections of the ship no longer existed. But the old battleship remained intact enough to keep floating. And somehow, that felt like victory. Captain Elena Reyes stood slowly from her chair. Every muscle in her body hurt. Cuts lined one side of her face. Her uniform was burned across one shoulder. But she was alive. Commander Malik checked the tactical display again, as if he still couldn't believe it. The enemy fleet is fully withdrawing. No one cheered immediately. The crew simply stared at the screen silently, because after everything they had survived, it still didn't feel real. Then somewhere near the back of the bridge, one exhausted weapons officer started laughing. Another joined him. Then another. Soon half the bridge crew was laughing uncontrollably. Not because the situation was funny, because they were alive, against impossible odds. They were still alive. A weak voice crackled across ship communications. "This is Chief Alvarez." Static interrupted her. "Engineering is officially declaring this ship a complete disaster." Several crew members smiled instantly. "But we are not dead yet." Now the bridge erupted. Exhausted applause echoed to the ruined command deck, while people leaned against broken consoles laughing in pure relief. Elena closed her eyes briefly, just for a second. Then a new transmission alert appeared. Commander Malik looked surprised. "It's Admiral Varkos." The bridge quieted instantly. Elena nodded once. "Put him through?" The central screen flickered weakly before the Valkyrie Admiral appeared. He looked completely different now. His uniform was torn. One side of his face carried dry blood. Smoke drifted behind him across the damaged bridge of the Imperial Dominion. The perfect admiral no longer looked perfect. For several seconds, neither commander spoke. Then Varkos finally broke the silence. "Captain Reyes." His voice sounded quieter now, more human. Elena met his gaze calmly. "Admiral." The Valkyrie commander looked away briefly before speaking again. "I underestimated you." No arrogance remained in his voice. No mockery, only honesty. "I underestimated your ship, your people, your species." Elena said nothing. Varkos slowly straightened despite the damage around him. The Valkyrie Empire withdraws all territorial claims against the frontier colonies effective immediately. Several bridge officers aboard the Resolute looked stunned. The admiral continued. "There will be no further attacks against human worlds." Silence settled across both bridges. Then Varkos asked quietly, "How did you know we would retreat first?" Elena looked around her shattered bridge, at exhausted crew members still standing at their stations despite injuries and smoke and exhaustion. Then she answered softly, "Because you fight to preserve victory." Her eyes hardened slightly. "We fight to protect home." The admiral stared at her for several long seconds, then slowly nodded, as if he finally understood something fundamental about humanity. "I will remember that lesson." Elena inclined her head slightly. "So will the galaxy." The transmission ended, and suddenly everything changed. News of the Battle of New Carthage spread across known space faster than any military report in modern history. At first, nobody believed it. One human battleship defeating a full Valkyrie strike fleet sounded impossible, ridiculous, propaganda, until the sensor logs were released. Then came the battlefield recordings. Then survivor testimony. Then confirmation from Valkyrie Command itself. And slowly, disbelief became shock. Shock became fascination. And fascination became respect. Across the galaxy, military analysts studied the Resolute obsessively. Why had the primitive railguns worked so effectively? How had an outdated ship survived that much punishment? Why did human engineering focus so heavily on redundancy instead of optimization? Entire governments began redesigning their fleets based on human combat philosophy. Backup systems, layered armor, manual controls, durability over elegance. Humanity had changed galactic warfare forever. 3 months later, the HMS Resolute returned to Convergence Prime, the same station where the galaxy had laughed at it. But this time, everything was different. As the Scar battleship approached the docking rings, ships from dozens of species transmitted greetings across open channels. Not mockery, respect. Some military vessels even saluted. Commander Malik looked around the bridge in disbelief. That's new. Elena smiled faintly. Yes. The Resolute docked slowly against the station hull. Its patched armor still carried burn scars from the battle. Several sections remained visibly mismatched after emergency repairs. Chief Alvarez had refused to polish any of it. These scars stay, she declared repeatedly. Let the galaxy look at them. And the galaxy did. Crowds gathered behind observation windows just to watch the old human battleship arrive. The relic, the joke, the ship that had faced impossible odds and refused to die. Later that evening, Elena stood quietly on the bridge looking out across the stars while repair crews moved around the hull outside. Commander Malik approached, carrying a data tablet. Earth Command approved construction of 6 new battleships. Elena glanced over. Based on the Resolute? He nodded. They're calling it the Titan class. A faint smile touched her face. Good. The galaxy needed more ships built by humans. Ships that valued survival over appearance. Determination over perfection. Ships willing to keep fighting long after logic said they should fall. Another officer approached carefully. Captain, incoming priority message. From who? The officer hesitated slightly. Admiral Varkos. The screen activated. The Valkyrie Admiral appeared once more. This time his expression held something unexpected. Respect. Captain Reyes, he said calmly. 6 months ago, I believe power came from superior technology. He looked directly into her eyes. You taught me something different. Elena remained silent. Varkos inclined his head slightly. The galaxy will not underestimate humanity again. The transmission ended, and somewhere beyond the stars, the legend of the Resolute continued spreading. Parents told the story to children. Military academies studied the battle for years. Historians called it the moment humanity stopped being viewed as a young species pretending to belong among giants. Because on the day one dying battleship faced an armada, humanity proved something unforgettable. Perfection breaks, but determination survives.